Hello. Um, 10 years ago, you probably heard all these statistics saying that by 2030, 70% of the human population are going to live in cities. This created a perfect opportunity for a very, very big buzzword to emerge, the idea of the smart city. So what is the idea of the smart city? Basically, if we have so much people living in cities, how are we going to manage the resources? How are we going to manage scarce resources in a way that they enable us to meet our needs day to day? And this, of course, created an opportunity for technology companies to come up and say, hey, I can deploy my IoT solution and my big data technologies to solve all of these issues. Now, whose issues? Issues who will benefit who? Issues who will address the concerns of who? If you go on Google Map, and on Google actually, and type smart city and do a Google search, you might come up with these sort of really shiny, beautiful built environment pictures where there's something really, really interesting. There are no humans. Smart cities have been incredibly criticized for having failed to deliver value to society as a whole. They have been criticized for not being inclusive, for delivering value to the big corporations that deploy the technologies, for relying heavily on proprietary assets. That means technologies that were not open source and data that were kept in hands of companies. Also, they were criticized because they didn't look at the fact that citizens often lack the technical skills to make sense of urban data and to use these technologies. So how were citizens going to ever be empowered with these technologies that they didn't understand or they couldn't use? Moreover, they were criticized because we failed at producing policy that protected citizens in terms of data surveillance, data ownership, and so on. The good news, and particularly a good news for us, is that now we have a new wave of smart city deployments. And this is good for us because this new wave of smart city approaches understand that sharing and the commons are very strong drivers for citizen innovation. Take the case of Seoul in South Korea, for example, that is trying to address its most pressing urban issues by fostering the emergence of a local sharing economy and embedding sharing practices at schools, at businesses, and neighborhoods. And the co-city model in Bologna, where they are trying to foster the appropriation of the city in hands of citizens that can sign agreements with the city council to develop and nurture urban commons that will create urban capital for everybody in the city. And the Fab City model, Amsterdam has recently become a Fab City. The idea is that through personal digital manufacturing, citizens and cities can move from a product in, trash out model into a data in, data out model, where cities are likely to become more self-sufficient and produce less trash and be more sustainable. There's one thing in common among this diversity of new approaches towards smart city. The fact that they recognize the citizen's right to contribute. While in the Smart City 1.0, the citizen was a mere user or consumer of technologies, or its participation was limited as in using Fix My Street and reporting potholes, in these new models, the citizen has the right to contribute to its city. The citizen is not just a user, but is an actual, genuine, creative, autonomous agent that can take ownership and the responsibility for building cities that are more inclusive and that solve issues that people really care about. Let me give you an example of how cities are leveraging the contributive powers of citizens to affect positive change and become really smart. We are working with Bristol in what is called the Bristol approach. We have realized that to really engage citizens at the grassroots level, to change the way cities work and address real issues, we needed a framework. This novel framework allows us to, first, not start with technologies, but start with issues, identifying issues that people really care about, so that we make sure that the program delivers value to its citizens, and not just to technology companies and city councils. After identifying the issues, we move on to another phase, which is the co-design of the technologies and the data structures that are going to empower users and stakeholders to collaboratively address those issues. Then we will move on to the orchestration, the deployment phase, where we don't only deploy the technologies that have been co-created by citizens, but also the skills that are relevant for citizens to take ownership of these tools and make sense of their cities. The end goal of using this novel framework is to produce a city commons, a resource environment with open technologies and knowledge that will empower any other community that is facing the same issues to appropriate these tools and effect change. So in the activation phase of the Bristol approach, we worked with communities to identify issues that were relevant to them. And guess what? We identified that a lot of people in Bristol cared about something that had never been addressed by any smart city program, and that is the problem of damp. Let me tell you that damp, humidity, is not just something that looks ugly in the wall of your house. Damp has been associated to respiratory disease, to allergies and asthma. It's a social stigma because people who have damp are scared of talking about this. And it's also been associated to fuel poverty, because people who have damp at home spend more energy trying to make their homes warm. So something that seemed to be very tiny actually is pretty huge. Over a number of workshops, we have collaborated with communities at the grassroots level to create a data commons to solve the issue of damp. And the idea is to not only create the tools. If you see, there is a little frog there. You see it? This is a humidity and temperature sensor that has been co-created by citizens in Bristol and can be borrowed by citizens to deploy it at home and reveal whether they have damp issues or not. And they have not only created these open source tools, but they're also putting together a commons, a data platform that not only maps the issue of damp in the city, but it also adds other layers of open data that can help us understand how big the problem is. For example, health data that allows us to see how damp correlates to health. Also allows for researchers to come on board and start studying how this problem is affecting population. It also geolocates the plumbers and the people who can quickly solve the problem of damp, so that citizens have a quick way of addressing this. It also creates opportunities for the city council to evaluate how the problem evolves. The idea is that collaboratively, they will create a set of assets to contribute to the solution of this problem. This new model could be applied to any other issue that engages citizens. And the interesting thing is that focusing on the creation of a city commons, we can create a more inclusive and co-designed society. We can create tools that are open source and know-how that can be appropriated by any other community facing similar issues. This leads to a new form of citizen participation that embeds agency, ownership, and responsibility in the context of the city. And the most interesting thing is that Bristol is not only going to be solving the problem of damp in Bristol, it will be solving this problem of damp for you and for you. Because the truth is that between 10 and 50% of the houses in Europe have damp. By doing this, by sharing the citizen-built solution to damp, Bristol is, ladies and gentlemen, becoming a contributive city. A new type of city that collaborates with citizens to co-create the open source solutions and the knowledge that is required for us all to tackle our own issues. Most interestingly, by creating commons that can be easily appropriated, we are more likely to foster innovation at the grassroots level and allow people to appropriate these solutions and create their own, which means that as a result, we'll have an enhanced ecosystem of solutions that are more suitable to everybody. So, while the Smart City 1.0 was looking at how technology could help us manage scarcity, the contributive city has a new approach. It's about understanding how we can co-create abundance. Imagine how amazing it would be if all cities became contributive cities, created commons that can be shared across cities, and evidence on how to deploy them so that we collaboratively can tackle those urban issues that companies and governments are really unlikely to tackle by themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mara.